Okay, now we're going to talk about SAT writing a little bit and look at some of the most common errors that will emerge in the writing section and how to understand them, how to identify them. One of the most common errors that will emerge that we need to get in the habit of identifying is what's called a misplaced modifier. So first, what a modifying phrase is, and then we'll understand why it's misplaced. So modifying phrases are phrases that provide a description of a person or a thing. They typically start off with verbs and then have like a comma, and then they describe what they're supposed to describe. They need to be placed as close as possible to the thing they modify. Otherwise, they're actually going to be modifying the wrong word, and whatever they're describing will apply to the incorrect word in the sentence. It's typically actually a very subtle error if you're not keeping an eye out for it. And let's kind of see why. Look at this first example here. So a writer who well understood the plight of the underprivileged, many acclaim Richard Wright as the novelist of the downtrodden. The modifying phrase in this particular one starts at the beginning of the sentence. It says that we have a writer, so someone in the world is a writer, and he has well understood, he well understood the plight of the underprivileged. Now, whoever well understood this and whoever was a writer, that should be the very next word after the comma, because that entire description was for him. But the way this is currently written, it says, many acclaim Richard Wright. So the way it's currently written, the entire little phrase modifies the many. Now, many people are not going to be a writer. So this is a misplaced modifier. And like I said, it would be subtle. It would be very easy to overlook that because you probably correct it in your head. You knew that first phrase was talking about Richard Wright, and it's not talking about these many acclaimed people. So you'd fix it. And if you're not keeping an eye out for it, you'd overlook this error. You wouldn't see an error. You'd struggle with the question. But by keeping an eye out for these modifying phrases, where there's someone or something that's being described, and there are going to be more details about this person, and then that person should be as close as possible to the phrase that's talking about him. That way, you can figure out kind of some of these more subtle errors. So we see A has this possible error. And anything that repeats that error, we'll want to cross off following our basic approach. So B also repeats the same error, just kind of changes the word, but it's still a many. E also has the same error. Widely acclaimed is Richard Wright. There's no reason to start off with the widely acclaimed, although it becomes a little bit clearer that it's Richard Wright. It's better just to put Richard Wright right next to it. Okay, well, we got rid of 3 answers by identifying one little error. The only trick was that it was a subtle error. Between C and D, we have one of our rules being broken in C. We shouldn't be choosing the word being 99% of the time. This is definitely one of them. It makes sentences awkward is always the official reason given if you look at explanations provided by the College Board. And it does. Is being acclaimed by many? There's no reason saying he's being acclaimed by many. D says it more clearly and with verbs rather than that awkward phrase. So D would be the preferred choice. So you got to get the word that's being described by a modifying phrase as close to the phrase as possible. If it's not, it's called a misplaced modifier. Let's look at another one, number 7. By including pieces of cloth, newspaper, wallpaper, and other materials in his work, Picasso's innovation had an important influence on 20th century art. So again, the sentence starts off with this phrase. Someone or something in the world is including pieces of cloth, newspaper, wallpaper, and other material in his work. But they haven't told us who it is yet. Well, we can figure it out. It's obviously going to be Picasso. And Picasso, the word, is right next to the phrase, so it seems maybe it might be okay. Except the trick on this one is they have the apostrophe S. So actually, it's not that Picasso is next to his description of his work. It's Picasso's innovation, as if that's the thing that was doing the including of pieces of cloth, newspaper, and wallpaper. Well, innovations can't, take actions of their own. They're trying to say Picasso did it. So it can't be A, because it's, again, a misplaced modifier. Currently, this whole phrase at the beginning is talking about Picasso's innovation as a whole. And innovations can't take actions, so it can't be that one. So it won't be A. Anything that repeats that similar error, still going to be a problem. This innovation, again, it makes it sound like the whole thing was talking about the innovation, so no. Picasso's, again, that's not Picasso himself, so it's not C. D and E fix the error D just says Picasso outright. E does use the word innovative before Picasso, but it's just describing Picasso as a person now. It's actually more modifying words. So the innovative Picasso. So it's going to be between D and E. We'll have to look for a new error between the two to decide. So let's compare the two and see which one's worse. So Picasso was influential with his innovation over 20th century art, or the innovative Picasso was an important influence on. You probably wouldn't say Picasso was influential over 20th century art. Not usually influential over kind of a period of art. You can be influential on something. So we have a little bit of an idiom error going in answer D. You wouldn't say influential over, you're influential on periods of time. So it has to be E. So it took us two kind of grammar concepts to get to the answer, but we were able to do it quickly and efficiently by paying attention to this subtle error. Let's look at a few more to make sure we fully understand it. Having no additional funds to spend, the meeting of the budget committee was promptly concluded. Okay. Again, we start off a sentence with a phrase, having no additional funds to spend. So someone or something has no additional funds to spend. Whatever that thing is that has no additional funds better be the very next word, otherwise it's a misplaced modifier. Unfortunately, it's not. It says the meeting of the budget. It's not that the meeting had no additional funds, it's that the budget committee itself had no additional funds. So again, we have a misplaced modifier. The meeting doesn't possess funds. So no to A, and then anything that repeats the error. No to B. It's not the conclusion of the budget committee that has no additional funds. It's the budget committee that has no additional funds. D says budget committee, so we're good. E says the budget committee's meeting. So it's apostrophe S with a meeting again. So it makes it sound like it's the meeting that has no additional funds, even though they got really close to fixing it. So this is a little bit rare that identifying one error gets you straight to the answer, but it actually worked out on this question, where it gets you straight to the answer if you see the misplaced modifier. So you can't correct these in your head. It is one of their favorite errors. And if you're going to correct it in your head, you're going to overlook it and the chance to cross off all these choices. Let's look at another case. Although known primarily as a poet, the paintings of Lawrence Ferlinghetti have recently been receiving public attention. Well, this time they have the phrase itself and the person they're supposed to be talking about underlined. So it starts off by saying, although known primarily as a poet, so someone or something in the world is known as a poet. The next word better be that person or thing. But it's not. It says the paintings. The paintings are not known as a poet. So it's not A. Anything that makes a similar error, we're going to cross off again. Although known primarily for his poetry, Lawrence Ferlinghetti's paintings, it's closer, but again, now it had that error where it attaches the apostrophe S. The paintings aren't known for his poetry. He's known for his own poetry, so it should have been the person they listed. C. Although his poetry is primarily what he is known for, Lawrence Ferlinghetti's paintings. Again, closer, but it has the same error as B does. Although Lawrence Ferlinghetti is known primarily as a poet and his paintings. Okay, that makes it clear actually. So we can leave D. And then E, although Lawrence Ferlinghetti is known primarily for his poetry, his paintings, etc., etc. Both of them don't repeat the same error as A. So we have to make a new decision on which one do we choose. So looking at D again and comparing it to E, they're pretty similar. Even the first, out of the two lines of each, the top line's the same. So let's focus on the second line of each. Primarily as a poet and his paintings. Is he known primarily as a poet and his paintings have recently been receiving? Or is he known for his poetry and then his paintings have been receiving public attention? There's no reason to say and separate his poetry from his paintings. The original sentence didn't. And it's trying to actually provide a little bit of a contrast. You wouldn't say the word although and the word and later on, because having paintings and being a poet usually don't go hand in hand. So the although set up a contrast that the and never fulfilled for us. So D would be incorrect, and E would be our choice. Okay, so our traditional form of modifiers, as we saw, is most of the sentences start off with like a verb phrase, where someone or something is being described right away. Then comma, they're supposed to describe the accurate thing. There's a modified version of these modifiers where it doesn't have to always come in that exact form. There's the alternate forms when the modifying phrase itself is the thing that's underlined. So let's look at these. Number 6. Having millions of gallons of fresh water underground, Florida environmentalists work to educate the public on the dangers of ground pollution. This time again we see a misplaced modifier. It says someone or something has millions of gallons of fresh water underground, and then it says Florida environmentalists right after the comma. That's probably not the person or thing that has millions of gallons of fresh water underground. So A is incorrect, but we can't change it like we normally do. Normally we change where the word Florida environmentalists are. We can't do that this time. It's not underlined. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to fix the modifying phrase itself to kind of get us to expect that there's going to be Florida environmentalists later on. At the very least, we know it's not A because of misplaced modifier error. B, because millions of gallons of fresh water are underground, Florida environmentalists work to educate. Since it says the word because now, it's no longer a modifying phrase. And we know that we're going to expect action on someone else. So Florida environmentalists work to educate because there's millions of gallons of fresh water underground. That makes a little more sense. C, because of fresh water in the millions of gallons, that's still not a modifying error, so we can leave it. By considering that there are millions of gallons of fresh water underground, Florida environmentalists work to educate. That actually, again, sets up the expectation that we'll be talking about not the person who owns the water, but people that are aware of it. So B, C, and D don't make a modifying error. E, awareness of the millions of fresh water underground, Florida environmentalists. It's probably not going to be right. It is bordering on a misplaced modifier error. Florida environmentalists don't possess awareness of the millions of gallons, and you wouldn't really describe it as an awareness. They know it, but it's not just an awareness of it, which is why they're taking action later in the sentence, working to educate the public. So only kind of 2 answers had what would be misplaced modifier errors. Looking at the remaining choices, we need to find kind of new errors to get us down to the final choice. So let's compare 2 at a time, B versus C first. Because millions of gallons of fresh water are underground, or because of fresh water in the millions of gallons underground, it's better to choose something that has a nice verb for us, the word are, than it is to choose a bunch of prepositional phrases trying to describe what's underground. So C is not going to be preferred. We also have our rule when we don't see grammar errors, we go with the shorter one. So even if you don't see kind of a grammar reason behind this, B is a little bit shorter, so it's going to be preferred compared to C. B versus D. Because millions of gallons of fresh water are underground, it's pretty clear. By considering that there are millions of gallons of fresh water underground, Florida environmentalists work to educate. Same message, but again, one's longer than the other. D also uses ing words. We try to avoid ing words. So D would not be a preferred choice. B is probably a preferred choice. Let's look at another one. As a child growing up on a farm, my sister and I visited many county fairs where my parents would exhibit their prized livestock. Again, slight misplaced modifier error. Can't change who we're describing though. The my sister and the I can't be moved around. But my sister and I are not a single child. So the fact it says a child makes this a little awkward. So A is wrong. B has the same type of error. C says children, so it kind of fixes it. We'll leave it. D says growing up. My sister and I can do that. That's fine. Since growing up, again, my sister and I can do that. So we fixed the modifying error part. We got rid of those problems. Now let's compare the remaining choices and see which one provides the meaning in the clearest way. So farm children and growing up, my sister and I visited many county fairs. They are farm children, and they are growing up, but there's no reason to have the word and, like just 2 descriptive things about them. You could just say you grew up on a farm. D is a better, more concise way to say it. And then D versus E. Since growing up on a farm, my sister and I visited many county fairs. That could be fine, except then it goes on to say where my parents would exhibit their prized livestock. the would and the since are not consistent with each other. You wouldn't say since this, my parents would do that. You're talking about the past, so the since is no longer appropriate. You need to keep it with the D. Growing up on a farm, my sister and I, yeah, both of us can grow up on farms. The modifying phrase works. Okay. Another error that they love to test is subject-verb agreement. This type of error, it's based on the subject and the verb of a sentence, as the name would imply. Let's understand what each of those are first. The subject of a sentence is the thing doing the main action of the sentence, and the verb is the action that that subject is performing. Typically, the subject is a noun. The subjects and verbs can come in either singular or plural form. If one of them is going to be singular, the other needs to be singular. And if one is plural, the other needs to be plural. Very simple rule. Now, the thing that throws people off is when I say that a word needs to be plural, most people think, okay, it needs to end in S. That's true for nouns. Nouns, in general, are plural when they end in S's. The word toys compared to the word toy. But verbs are not plural when they end in, sorry, verbs are plural when they do not end in an S. So a good way to always think about this is come up with an example like with he or they. So would you say he likes ice cream? Or they likes ice cream? Well, you say he likes ice cream. But the main verb here, the likes, has an S on it, even though it's a singular sentence. So the verb does not have an S most of the time when it's plural. When it does have an S, that actually turns verbs singular. So you can kind of think of it as there's an S to share between the subject and the verb. If it's on the subject, it shouldn't be on the verb. If it's on the verb, it shouldn't be on the subject. It's one S to share. And most of the time, both words won't have an S. Only one will. So let's get a few examples here. Number 2, an increased concentration of carbon dioxide and certain other gases in the Earth's atmosphere, contributing to global warming. Now, the contributing is a little awkward. It would be okay to have the comma and then contributing to global warming if you could end the sentence right after the word atmosphere. But it'd be a little awkward to do that, an increased concentration of carbon dioxide and certain other gases in the Earth's atmosphere. You're kind of left wondering, okay, what next? There's no verb as to what's going on in that sentence. There's no main verb. The contributing was supposed to be the main verb, but the comma kind of cut it off. So looking at the alternatives, we might be able to see what exactly we're being tested on. The alternatives debate between contribute and contributes. Well, that's like the S issue on the main verb that we were talking about just a second ago. So A is going to be incorrect because it doesn't really have a main verb. Let's look at the other ones and decide, should it be contributes or contribute? So the subject is an increased concentration, and then it just happens to be of carbon dioxide and certain other gases. Usually ignore prepositional phrases. So of carbon dioxide and certain other gases, we don't care. The subject is an increased concentration. And actually, you can also ignore the second prepositional phrase in the Earth's atmosphere. The core grammar of this sentence is an increased concentration contributes to global warming. And that's a complete sentence. There's nothing left wondering. It's not as detailed, but it is a complete grammar sentence. And that's a good way to look at subject-verb errors. Ignore the prepositional phrases in between the subject and the verb, and focus on the core grammar part of the sentence. Well, now that we've ignored those prepositional phrases for the moment, it becomes clear it should be contributes, so it can't be B. So let's look at the remaining differences. We could have atmosphere, comma, which contributes. We wouldn't want to do that because by having a comma and then the word which creates a phrase of apposition. And phrases of apposition are when basically it's not essential to a sentence. You could remove it if you'd like. And you can't. You can't say an increased concentration atmosphere. We already tried that before, where ending it at after the atmosphere doesn't work. So we wouldn't choose C. For D, an increased concentration, since they have the word atmosphere, we have to kind of read it, or we could ignore it. Just cross them off everywhere. An increased concentration contributes to global warming. That's short and simple, probably ideal. We like short answers, unless we have to have more words. E, an increased concentration and contributes to global warming. There's no reason to say the and, because the core of the sentence doesn't require it. So the answer would only be D. Let's look at a few more. Number 11, the arts and crafts movement at the turn of the 20th century was a revolt against the uniformity of objects mass-produced by the factories of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, it's a long sentence. Let's focus on the beginning, the subject of the sentence. The arts and crafts movement. Now, arts and crafts seems plural because each of the words say arts, like plural, and crafts, plural, and they even are joined by the word and, which normally makes things plural. But since it's just a single whole movement, the subject is actually itself singular because it's the movement that matters. So the verb later on should also be singular. So the movement at the turn of the 20th century was a revolt. Was is a main verb, and was is singular. So right now it's matching. It's okay. Let's look at the answers though and see if any of them switch them to were. B, century revolted against objects that were mass-produced. It does have the were. It moved it around, so it might be okay. We'll come back to it. C has one of our common errors. It says century being a knit revolt. We don't choose answers that have being, so no. D, century was revolting against mass-produced, so we're good there, and century has revolted against uniformity. Okay, so this came fine, like in a good format. Singular matched with the other singulars. There was only one debate with the word were. And actually, it's okay to use that were, because the word here, and answer B, applies to objects. So the arts and crafts movement at the turn of the 20th century revolted against objects that were mass-produced. The were is fine, but now it's making it sound like the objects, or sorry, the movement revolted. Movements don't revolt. People in movements revolt. So it wouldn't be B, because it changes the meaning now. Okay, A versus D. The arts and crafts movement at the turn of the 20th century was revolting against mass-produced uniform objects. Again, it makes it sound like the movement's the thing doing the revolting, rather than the people in it. That little was a revolt is actually pretty important today. The arts and crafts movement at the turn of the 20th century has revolted against uniformity. The movement, again, has not been the one doing the revolting, so it's not E either. It has to be A. But we saw how much they do like to focus on the verb of a sentence here, and how they can sometimes switch around the was and the were. So the stuff needs to stand out to us. It is one of their favorite errors. Okay, a couple more. Because the meteorite, Agonito, the centerpiece of the Hall of Meteorites, weigh 34 tons, support for it goes through the floor and foundation down to the bedrock beneath the museum. Okay, well, we see in the answer choices an immediate change between the word weigh and weighs. So focusing on that can help us figure out what the proper answer should be. Weigh and weighs are both verbs, so let's find the subject of the sentence to decide which verb is the right one. So what's the thing weighing 34 tons? What's the thing performing that action, just being heavy? Well, it's that particular meteorite, Agonito. Well, Agonito, that's a single meteorite. So we need a singular verb. Remember, verbs, they're singular when they usually do not have S's. So it wouldn't be A and it wouldn't be E here. Those get the subject-verb agreement incorrect. Let's look at the remaining choices. B versus C. See which one's worse. Weighs 34 tons. Its supports go through the floor, or you could say, and it has support that go through the floor. You wouldn't say that go, you'd say that goes. So C is wrong. B versus D. Weighs 34 tons. Its supports go through the floor. It's okay. Supports are there for it. and they go through the floor. It's just an incredibly wordy way to say the same thing. So we'd prefer answer B. So number 12. Even minor usage and spelling errors make the reading task harder and can cause readers to suspect that the content of the document is also flawed. Okay? Looking at the answers again at the beginning, where many errors occur, or at the end, we see that they change around the word make and makes. So it's a subject-verb issue. Let's make a decision on it, which one's appropriate. So even minor usage and spelling error make the reading. Well, the subject would be the minor usage and the spelling errors. So it's plural. So we need a plural verb. Remember, plural verbs usually don't have an S on the end. So for 12, the make is fine. Anything that says makes is incorrect. So goodbye to B. C is fine, has make. D, they switch it to will make. That could be okay. E says will have made. Have is plural, so that could be okay too. But at least we get rid of the first answer by deciding on the subject-verb error. Now we'll have to compare again. So even minor usage and spelling errors, C, make reading hard and make readers suspicious that the content of the document is also flawed. We want to maintain the meaning that it's harder than it would be. And C actually makes an error on the second makes anyway. It brings in the word makes, even though it's still talking about the plural subject before. So it turns out to have the same error as B. It's the easiest way to eliminate C. A versus D now. Even minor usage and spelling errors will make the task of reading hard. It thus can cause readers to suspect the content of the document is also flawed. That comma shouldn't be a comma. The way it's written right now, if that's a comma and then it says it thus afterwards, that could be a full sentence afterwards and a full sentence to the left of the comma. When it's supposed to be a full sentence on both sides of the comma, you shouldn't be using a comma. You should be using periods or semicolons on the SAT. So we can't do that here. So A versus E, even minor usage and spelling errors will have made the reading hard. Part's okay, which means that readers suspect that the content of the document is also flawed. Okay, the which creates that phrase of apposition again, which means this part's supposed to be irrelevant to the sentence. It's not what the original sentence was trying to say though, so we'll probably not prefer that choice, and it's a little bit longer than answer A, even though she had just a couple letters longer. So it kind of breaks a couple of our rules. It's changing the meaning slightly, and it's too long. Okay. And let's look at the last one here. The care exercised by the company in investigating side effects of various kinds of drugs have won them their enviable reputation among scientists. Well, let's ignore those prepositional phrases. Let's cross off the by the company in investigating side effects of various kinds of drugs. Takes away a lot. So the care exercised have won them? No, the care is a single thing. They're taking one action, the care. So the word have, which is plural, shouldn't be used. So goodbye ABC. So subject-verb errors can really help out. It's one of their favorite errors. So it's either has won for it there or has won it and enviable reputation. But we're talking about a company. You shouldn't say there when referring to a company. So not D, it has to be E. So those are two of their favorite errors, misplaced modifiers and subject-verb. The misplaced modifier error, it's rather subtle. You got to keep an eye out for it. Subject-verb errors can be separated from each other if we're not keeping an eye out for prepositional phrases separating them. So keep an eye out for those. If you identify these, it's a quick way to cross off a few answers at once. We did that for the majority of questions that we looked at today.